We're now being recorded. Wonderful. The work that we're going to be sharing with you and the conversation that we hope to initiate with you is really part of a larger study, but also a larger process that we're undertaking and have been involved in. That in fact we even introduced at the last Gobeshna conference 1 year ago when we were just getting off the ground, and it was kind of first initiated in relation to the Adaptation Futures 2023 conference, which is taking place later this year here in Montreal. There are people, we recognize there are people who are coming from kind of various communities of research and practice related to climate. You may have heard of Adaptation Futures, but certainly some of the reflections that we'll be presenting to you were born out of wondering post COVID-19. Just as a bit of a background, Adaptation Futures was intended to be held in 2020 April in Delhi, India. You can imagine that did not happen. It was meant to be held in person. It was then moved to 2021 again in Delhi, India. You can imagine that again it did not happen, and ultimately ended up happening in October 2021 in a fully virtual format. So as we reflect on what we're learning about models of conferencing and knowledge exchange, as things go back to some kind of form of normal, what do we want to take away from this? How do we make sure that conferences and knowledge exchange are impactful, are sustainable, are equitable in the face of lots of global disruptions, climate change being obviously one that we're all concerned about. That is really the question we've been asking ourselves, and the sort of the focus of this and a series of talks we're having with members of this climate and sustainability community over the next 6 months. So maybe with that in mind, if Elaine, we could share screen, maybe it would just kind of kick it off with, here, just get the slides showing. Kick it off with maybe an invitation to learn a little bit about who else is in the room. I know that some people are maybe like eating their lunch or halfway kind of paying attention. So I will just ask those who are interested in introducing themselves, maybe describing what drew them to this session. And thirdly, just as a kind of an icebreaker, one memorable experience of knowledge exchange that you've had in your career or in your life. It doesn't have to be a conference. Maybe it was a workshop that you went to. Maybe it was sitting down with somebody one-to-one and having some kind of a moment of learning that was really kind of impactful for you. But just a way for us to sort of know who's joining us today. Because his camera is on and I know who he is, I would maybe start with Nick and just see what you have to say.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Nick Graham, and I am a weaver of communities and conferences. So I'm working with Blaine and Elaine in an ecosystem of conferences. So I'm running the Transformations Conference whilst Blaine and Elaine are running the Adaptation Futures Conference. And I'm really interested in how we pass knowledge between these conferences that are so often in silos, even if we're in the same space of climate change or making the world better. There's so much that's lost after that great energy. And so that's what really draws me to this, because I really love the work that Blaine and Elaine are doing in this space. And I love learning from people. And this is, in terms of knowledge exchange, I learned through osmosis by rubbing shoulders with brilliant people like we have in this room. And one really powerful tool that I use is learning circles. So, you imagine a conference with hundreds, thousands of people, but a learning circle is something that can sprout out of it and then has these legs that go on in the months and years beyond. So a much smaller group that really share and connect around a really meaningful personal and professional whatever is that knowledge exchange. But yeah, learning circles, that's my most memorable recent memory. Thank you for the invitation. Yeah.
Thanks. Maybe Mazabin, are you online and wanting to contribute?
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yep.
See myself. Oh, okay. Hello, I'm Mazabin. I'm working as a research officer for International Center for Climate Change and Development, and I'm your ICID liaison person for this session. So yes, really looking forward to this.
Thanks so much. Maji, did you want to contribute? If not, you can remain silent and we will take it that you're maybe more in listening mode, and that's perfectly okay. It's actually one of the things that was part of our research, like learning that, especially with virtual participation, people come with different expectations of what they want to contribute and what they want to get out of it. Shauna. Shauna?
Hi, good morning. Shauna McKinley. I'm based in Vancouver, Canada. And this is my first, I guess, somewhat face-to-face introduction to this group, but I've been following your work for quite some time. Just as a bit of background, I work within what we would call the event sector. So I'm working day to day with professional conference organizers, congress organizers of all types. And I'm actively involved in the ISO 20121 process, which is currently underway, the Environmental Management System Standard for events. Up until now, we've been siloed in thinking only about logistics, the impact of those logistics and how to reduce them. But of course, as a management system standard, there is a need to consider stakeholders and the legacy of their learning and their knowledge, which is a new layer of the standard that I'm quite keen to discuss with the team that is working on it right now, which of course includes not just Congress and conference and academic and research events, but Olympic Games, sporting events, and festivals of all types. So I'm interested in listening. I feel like I'm learning from what you're doing, and it's a topic that in the quote professional event sector with people who are employed to do this on a daily basis and make those logistical planning decisions, we're not really talking or thinking about it very much. So I think we have a lot to learn, and I'm interested in being a fly on the wall. So thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Shauna. It's great to have you here. I've followed your work. Ariane.
Yeah, sorry. I'm Ariane and I'm a doctoral student at ETH Zurich. So I'm from Switzerland, and I'm interested in the session because I do research in my dissertation that is very close to what you're doing. So I'm examining how to reduce academic air travel, and I focus a lot on substituting it with virtual communication. So I focus a lot on different conference formats, so virtual and hybrid conference formats.
Welcome to this virtual conference format. And I think one of the organizers of this virtual conference format is Sakib. And Sakib, are you able to unmute?
Hi, everybody. I apologize if there's any interference or background noise. My name's Sakib Haq. I'm the assistant director at ICAD, and along with my colleague Sarah and Mazabin, I'm one of the core organizers for the Gobeshona conference. So we're really grateful for all of you to take the time to host the session today. And from my perspective as well, I'm quite keen to sort of learn about different ways of knowledge exchange.
I think we've
just
Sakib, we've lost you, but I'm glad that you're here, and I think we caught most of that. So greatly appreciated that you're here. And
that's one of the core objectives of our conferences, ways of being able to link people in what.
It's a real-time experience of some of the challenges that we face on this. So yeah, thanks so much. Sarah, did you want to take a moment to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, this is Sarah Farhan. I coordinate the Gobeshona program at the International Center for Climate Change and Development, and I very much look forward to the session happening now. As I read through the description, it's something about a conference, right? So probably it will help me gain somewhat capacity. It will build my capacity somewhat. Okay, thank you everyone.
Thank you. We're just about there. We've got Bruce in Ottawa.
There we go. Just fumbling with the mute switch, which is one of the things I think we've all been dealing with over the past couple of years. So Bruce Currialder with Canada's IDRC, International Development Research Centre. I had the privilege of coming into a program that Blaine was leaving. And it was looking at collaboration across a number of research projects in Africa and Asia. So let me answer your second question. You know, a key moment for me was the third learning review that collaborative brought together. And I think two features of it that were really unique were having open space. So having a part of the gathering that wasn't saturated with content and allowing people the chance to breathe, to ask themselves, what did we want to learn or do together now? And still have time at the event, whereas sometimes events end and you feel like that's an unrealized potential. Particularly at that event, I remember one table where we sat together with the PIs, the principal investigators, and said, what's the top 5? You know, what's the key messages that have come out of $70 million, 5 years of work, all the complexity that was there, with the simplicity on the opposite side of that complexity. So in that sense, I think I'm looking from this session to see where you've gone from last year in Gobeshona. What are the insights for adaptation futures, as you mentioned, 2023 and beyond? And where we already maybe need to look beyond, that what we'll be able to do this year won't fully realize all of the learning that you have on knowledge exchange, but how the next number of years we can get increasingly better at this rather than only transformations or AF this year, but how we get better at doing what you and Elaine have been looking at over the past while. Thank you. Over.
Thanks, Bruce. I think we have 2 others. We have Hassan or Muhammad Hassan. If you're offline, that's okay. And or maybe we just pause and get to Valeria.
Hi, yeah, thank you. So I'm Valeria Cruz. I'm joining from Mexico City, and well, what drew me into this conference is I'm currently working at REDAR UK. It's a capacity building organization, and I specifically work on the climate change training. So yeah, just looking forward to hearing about your work on and just take these insights into what's also needed into capacity building and what we can take into our training. So thanks a lot for holding this conversation.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for your patience as we went all around, but it's so exciting to have, I mean, definitely one of the benefits is people from all corners of the world joining to have these conversations in the face of sometimes some technological hiccups, but nonetheless. Maybe what I'll do is hand over to my colleague Elaine to kind of set the scene for some of the things that we'll be discussing before we turn over to those of us in the room to kind of solicit your contributions, your reflections to some work in progress that we're working on.
Thank you so much for the transition, Blaine. So basically what I will be doing is kind of opening up the discussion by this very open question, and this is really the questions that we've been thinking these days of what actually constitute an equity and inclusion and impactful climate and sustainability knowledge exchange. So we're sort of a lot of our work and including thinking about facilitation in these places, virtual spaces, we're actually operating based on the three big principles, if you may. So sort of a very quick definition, we'll come back to this, but, of these concepts. So when we say like equity inclusion, it's definitely related to the access to and representation in both the process and content. So again, like all kinds of spaces like in-person, virtual, hybrid, and the access or representation to them. So the impact here, we're sort of looking at the kind of impact of the knowledge exchange process. So the generated outcomes at individual and collective levels that enhance our ability to act. And the third principles is related to a lot of, I think a lot of us are kind of starting to think about this like sustainability aspect of it. So the limits the ecological burden produced by the exchange. So air travel, for example, and before the pandemic, a lot of the research is around like green conferencing, for example. So these are the three principles that we'll be talking about. And these are also the three principles that we've been thinking about in our research. So based on these big questions, we kind of have this like opportunities, which is the pandemic, like really help us to reimagine what does it mean to do knowledge mobilization and knowledge exchange in different ways. And so some scholars try to say like, you know, look, this is a very wide existing experiment. Now we know that virtual space can work if we want to. So there's a stronger and stronger push from the academic side, within the academic side, to say now we have to lead by examples to really sort of decarbonize our way of doing conferencing, our way of doing international research. And so this is also more than academic as well, like a business meeting as well, like from some of the participants that we just like mentioned, you know, like a lot of this kind of fly-in, fly-out practices. But at the same time, there's a dichotomy there to think about, well, but a lot of the global climate action actually require those international collaboration. So this kind of pandemic really gave our research a kind of a boost in terms of thinking about, well, but can we actually doing in both ways, simultaneously equitable, inclusive, and impactful research, impactful global collaboration, and also do it in a more sustainable way. And if so, how can we move from here? So even though we're kind of talking about, I'm going to talk about conferences a lot, but this is actually just kind of one of the examples as an entry point for our research. But we're actually thinking about knowledge exchange very broadly. So now kind of moving a little bit, talking about a little bit of background of the research. So this is kind of a 4 years collaboration with this NGO called Grano and McGill University to really think about, well, what are the lessons that we can draw from the pandemic and what are the opportunities that we can actually take from those lessons that we've learned? And are there some of the entry point that we can actually amplify and really work on those to actually have the actual transformation to decarbonize the way that we're operating? And this collaboration also sort of had a practical aspect of it. It's really kind of like generating research insights and to inform the design of Adaptation Future 2023. And that's what we've been talking about. So it's a design-based research. So the following presentation is really drawing on a couple of data sources. First is the scoping review from the literature, and the second is an online survey with 166 respondents. I will kind of talk a little bit about the demographic of the respondents later, but we also did a cross-case analysis of 7 like relevant cases, conference cases, and with key informant interviews. So in the literature, a lot of the discussion about air mobility and decarbonizing our air travel is kind of like based on the literature or discussion largely in the global north. And so in our survey, we're really trying to reach the people that were actually not represented in the literature when we're doing the scoping review. Like at the time, it wasn't really represented in the literature at the time. So it's an online survey, and we actually were able to get a wide range of perspectives. So in terms of the professional level and the professional role, so it's not only specifically looking at academics, but really looking at how this collaboration can be done in a transdisciplinary way. And in terms of language diversity as well, like for example, it's 40%, about 40% of the survey respondents self-identify English as their native English. So even though the survey is in English and French, we also actually get a wide range of representatives from the people. So that's enough of the background of the research, but what we've got so far. First, it's kind of, yes, from the literature, there are a couple of equity and inclusion issues that we've known. Traditional sort of conferencing space, a lot of the barriers, it's already well studied. For example, the cost, the travel, for example, visa privilege, the language barrier, and also a lot of the accessibility issue that is privileged able-bodied people, for example, and then also the concern of childcare. These kind of like barriers, it's already known. The virtual space as well, a lot of discussion around the technical challenges, the time zone privilege as well. And these are the barriers in the virtual space were also identified in our survey, but we also discovered a couple more that it's actually require a little bit more intervention. So for example, the digital divide. This is a very big challenge, especially for Global South participants. And one interviewee even called it kind of a digital apartheid, for example. So when we're asking people, what is the barrier to a rewarding conference experience? Almost half of the Southern-based participants say, well, actually, I didn't even get to have a chance to have an online conference experience because of the technical challenges. So most of the time, I'm just trying to connect to the conference. And the second factor that it's sort of well-known in the in-person conferencing space, but we also found that cost is also one of the barriers that actually influence some groups more than other groups. So when we're asking people, what is the factor that you're considering when you're choosing conference, in person and virtual, we found that actually students group have, this is cost is a big concern for student respondents. And even in virtual conferences, students and practitioners actually consider the cost of virtual conferences as being more. There's some possible explanation there that we're thinking about. Perhaps it's because institutional support actually do not, like virtual interaction, virtual conferences usually are not seen as significant as in-person conferences. So maybe there's a lack of institutional support to sponsor students and practitioners to attend virtual conferences. And so this is where perhaps in terms of the capacity support or in terms of thinking about the what we call travel award can be actually can be rethought and think about how this actually impact different groups of the participants. And another factor is convenience. So what we found is that from the survey, convenience stands out as a potential barrier to virtual conferencing. When we're asking people, and this is actually across geographical regions, across a career stage, and also across professional roles. The possible explanation there is maybe there is a time zone privilege. Some people are just, I know that, for example, our very nice support staff, they are like midnight in Bangladesh there, and I'm like super grateful. And there has been a phenomenon called obligation to be present in the literature. Basically, when the virtual world and physical world start to combine, the two actually coexist, and people actually expect people to be like there for both worlds instead of one replace the other. However, in-person conferences, there is an advantage of when you're in person, and it's kind of rude to just like, okay, let me multitask now. So the sort of convenience become a very important consideration, especially for And that's from our survey results, especially for people who are between 6 to 10 years of career experience. And that become a very critical factor when they're choosing which virtual conference to attend. So the second principles from our study, the insight from our study, the impact. And what we found is, well, the majority of people actually think conference participation are very important for their professional advancement. And that's especially true for Southern-based respondent. Like 30% of the Southern-based respondent actually say, well, it's actually essential for their professional advancement. But does it actually mean it's an impactful conference? Is it impactful for individuals' professional advancement, or it is impactful for other things? That's something that we're not sure. But when we dig into the qualitative responses, what we found is actually most of people think about the kind of impact in terms of their professional needs a bit more. For emerging professionals, what they're looking for from conferences, it's actually, for example, the opportunity to push for more immediate feedback for their work, and to get more content, like cognitive content learning, to be able to ask questions directly, and of course, like kind of this professional networking element of it, to meet new people, to meet the actual person who they've been following for a while. And that's kind of what we're seeing from the qualitative responses from emerging professionals. For established professionals, their professional need at conference space seems a little bit different. So when they're thinking about in-person conferences, they're actually looking for this kind of focus time for them to have some side meetings and to maybe collaborate on some papers, like really doing some actual work in person. And there's something interesting that emerged from the survey is that people who have 10 plus years of experience actually goes to virtual conferences for diverse perspectives. So they also have the similar social professional needs at the in-person conferences, but they especially value the diversity in the virtual spaces. So how can we actually leverage the kind of the capacity support from this group of people is something that we can continue to think about. And of course, the last principle, the sustainability concern. And so what we found from the literature, it's consistent. People have been consistent saying that, yes, air travel and air mobility is a very stubborn domain of consumptions. It's very difficult to kind of change the behavior in terms of individual resistance as well as the structural barriers. That it's it's a challenge. And from our survey, we also found that people seems to have a very fixed mindset of what conferencing mean. So for example, when they're choosing in-person and virtual conference, people don't make distinction between what they're looking for in terms of in different conferencing models. Like conference themes, professional networking, and the opportunity to present continue to be the primary consideration when people just decide whether or not they're going to the conference, either in person or virtual. But the question now, kind of coming back to knowledge exchange practices, is can this replace by other form of knowledge exchange practices? Do we need to fly in somewhere for this all the time? And mind that the survey respondents are people who self-identify in the professional field of climate and sustainability, but interestingly, carbon emission didn't really stand out as a determining factor when people choose conferences, with only 15% of the people say, well, this is a factor when they think about in-person conferences, and only 8% of them identify this as a virtual conferences. So is it because this is not being put as a priority for conference organization, or is it because there's other institutional incentives and social professional needs actually trump carbon emission as a factor? Is also something that we can continue to think about. So based on these research insights, we're going to kind of have a more interactive component of the conference. I'll hand the floor to Blaine to sort of talk about what we're planning to do.
Thanks, Elaine. So maybe to Actually, but maybe before I jump into this, I'll just pause to see if there are questions that came out of what Elaine has just presented that anyone wants to raise, or clarifications before we jump into to the next step. I know that there are some folks on the call who are kind of deeply engaged in these kinds of questions, and if you have kind of comments or questions on the presentation of these results, this might be a good time to raise them. I'm practicing the art of waiting an extra 10 seconds longer than you normally would in an in-person one for the online one, which is one of those little facilitation tips that I've kind of like learned as we went along, which gets back into like, how do we actually enable knowledge exchange across these spaces? Some of these little things make a difference, I suppose. Look, if there aren't questions at the moment, what I'll do is maybe just introduce the sort of the, if you will, what we're calling a bit of a knowledge co-construction journey that this event is the sort of start point on. So one of the concerns, and particularly around both the impact and the sustainability of conferences, was a concern that we have with the fact that we get on a plane, or in the old days, get on a plane, fly to a conference, have a conversation, fly home. A few months later, fly to a similar conference that remains in our field, have a very similar conversation, and fly back home with very limited sense of how the dots are being connected between these conversations that are happening in a global field. And when we think about an issue like issues like climate and sustainability, are the speed at which we are able to kind of emerge, refine, validate, and communicate new understandings is critical. And yet it seems that our conferences, at least historically, have been siloed sort of spaces of dialogue that have not always done a very good job about passing forward the insights to be built on at subsequent conversations. This isn't always the case when we think of the IPCC and other major activities. There's a design that is kind of intended to do that, but I think for the most part that has been the case. And so we're trying really to test out a new model here by submitting actually this conversation to 3 conferences that are kind of over the space of 6 months, with a view to actually building the conversation as we solicit inputs from different kind of participants who are in different parts of the sort of the landscape, if you will. So today marks the first iteration of this conversation, recognizing that this is based at an online-only conference where the host institution is in the Global South in Bangladesh. We have, I surmise, a fair number of Bangladeshi colleagues who I hope will contribute their experiences and their perspectives to this conversation as we go, and begin to gather some insights and areas of concern. In a few months' time, we'll be gathering again virtually at the Transformations Conference that Nick just mentioned to us, which will be happening both in person and virtually, to take some of these similar questions and deepen our insights into them with a new set of stakeholders who are joining. The interesting thing with Transformations is it's more of a sustainability conference than a climate-specific conference, but we believe there's enough overlap in the conversations we're having around these issues that we can really kind of draw them together. And we want to start building connections between kind of the local context and global practices that we're seeing. As you know, the Transformations Conference is actually happening in a few cities and online simultaneously. So trying to broaden that diversity of insights. And the dialogue will reach its kind of conclusion at the Adaptation Futures Conference in October of 2023 here in Montreal and online, where what we'll try and do is actually consolidate the insights that people have been sharing over this journey and generate a set of recommendations that are, and Bruce, this goes back to your kind of your point, that are bigger than the 3 conferences that that the conversation unfolded at, that are more about, this is where our conversation suggests that the field needs to move forward. These are some of the principles that we start to see potentially emerging about the ways that our knowledge exchange can evolve moving forward, not just kind of virtual, but more broadly. So today marks the sort of tentative first step in that journey, and it, as is always the sort of the challenging thing, we'll be asking for you to help us to populate some of the ideas around this. And so this does kind of depend on some of your inputs and your contributions to the conversation. I'm inspired and motivated by the fact that some of the people that are in the room today are highly knowledgeable about this and are kind of keen to contribute. And I hope that we will fuel some of that. I am putting a link to a Jamboard in here that I am going to share, and maybe I'll briefly, if anyone has difficulty in knowing how to access the Jamboard, then like do let us know. But what we wanted to do, I'm seeing people clicking the link and joining, which is always a valuable, a good sign. I've had my permission settings right. And so it's a pretty straightforward one. We wanted to keep this simple, and we wanted to like leave space for lots of brainstorming and people's ideas. So we have 3 slides. The first one is about the features of effective knowledge exchange. So we talked about 3 things in our presentation, 3 principles that have, from our review, have stood out as being really important. The first, equity and inclusion. So knowledge exchange that does a good job of ensuring access to and representation in both the process and the content. What are some of those features that we see in those? Sustainability being one of the features where we limit the ecological burden produced by the exchange. So, you know, seeing what are some of the things that effective practices allow us to do if we are really limiting that ecological burden. And lastly, the features around impact, where we're generating knowledge exchange that generates outcomes at both individual and collective levels that can enhance our ability to act, right? So I want to highlight here, I think it's important to recognize that sometimes these things, there are trade-offs between them. We may feel that a key feature of an impactful knowledge exchange is hands-on experience of working with something, going out and actually seeing things happening in a field-based or kind of land-based way. But then the possibility of doing that virtually becomes a lot more challenging, right? So how do we trade off kind of the impact for the sustainability sometimes? Are there ways of marrying the two that are important? The second slide, and to change slides, you just see there's an arrow at the top between left and right. Maybe I should share my screen so that I can, so that folks can see this. Second slide are the barriers, and really what we're asking of you is, what are some of the barriers that you've encountered in your experience that limit equity and inclusion, either in person or online? What are some of the barriers that limit our kind of ability to reduce the ecological burden? Elaine mentioned, and this is a very kind of real example from our university, that for the longest time, the only way to get funding support for participating in a conference was to get for paying conference fees, was to get a travel grant. Travel grants were what paid your conference fees. If you weren't getting on a plane, then you couldn't receive the funds to pay for your enrollment in the conference. So it essentially creates a perverse incentive to fly to the conference so that you can receive the funding, even though you could potentially join virtually, but then you would have to pay the enrollment fees out of your pocket. It's just to give an example of a barrier of these institutional incentives that are for example, promoting high carbon intensive participation instead of low carbon participation. And what are some of the barriers to impact that we might have experienced, such as, for instance, maybe conferences that are entirely PowerPoint presentations and therefore kind of, limit our ability to kind of learn. The last one is just asking if you have examples of good practice that you feel are kind of showcase not only kind of how we do low carbon, but how we ensure equity and inclusion, or how we promote impact in our knowledge exchange, so that as we build this, what we're really building on this journey is kind of a repository of insights and a repository of experiences that we can translate with the community into recommendations and principles of practice. We thought we would maybe spend a few minutes allowing people to kind of like work independently on some of these ideas. Maybe we can put people that we weren't sure how many people would be here, and maybe we actually have enough for people to be into a few small groups. If time allows, we might move to the last slide and see whether people are already starting to identify some principles that they think are really important and should be carried forward to the next event. So I just really want to emphasize that your contributions here are not just sort of like populating a Jamboard that we're going to kind of close down and forget all about at the end of our session today, and we'll collect dust in our virtual Google Drive. It will be brought to the next event to be summarized and presented to invite people to sort of build on it. And I think that's really part of what we're trying to do differently through this session that hopefully will yield some fruit. Maybe I'll open the floor to see if there are any questions or comments or concerns. What we will do at the same time is post some of the examples from our own presentation into here so that you feel like you've got some ideas that are coming in. Are there any questions? Maybe what I'll do is thinking out loud here on the fly, Elaine, would we like to do a couple of breakout rooms? Would that maybe stimulate some conversation?
Sure, we can do that. I can randomly assign people.
Sure. My apologies to those who are thought they were just going to be quietly munching on their sandwich whilst listening to a long presentation or forcing you into action.
Whenever we're ready.
So Elaine and I will break into one of the groups each. We can share our screen for the group, and what we'll do is invite people to, we'll try and stimulate some of the dialogue around this in our rooms. We'll give ourselves maybe, let's say 10 minutes to chat and brainstorm. And then as we we'll come back and see if any ideas are starting to come and get some feedback from folks in plenary. Does that sound good? So Elaine, maybe we'll reconvene at 1 o'clock.
Okay, so now
right.
In the room now.
All right.
See you in a bit. We're in countdown. So they will be back in 30 seconds.
I feel like we probably could have kept going for a few minutes in our group at least. So apologies if folks got cut off. And what I would suggest is feel free to continue populating these as we chat here. There's some, wow, there's so many examples of good practice that are kind of emerging. It's like really inspiring to see all this stuff. And I don't know if maybe we want to just have some kind of feedbacks that people, maybe from folks that were involved in the conference, in the breakout rooms that want to highlight something that stood out for them. Valeria, thank you for stepping up.
Yeah, thank you. Well, so maybe it's on response to something Shana shared with us at the end of our breakout room that I didn't get the chance to reply during the breakout room, but I think now's a good time to say it. So she was, Shana, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I've heard you share that in conferences out of the climate change topic, people would think that people want to go back to in-phase due to maybe not having full awareness of what that means in terms of sustainability, and that apparently after seeing your research results, that may not be the reason. There may be other reasons why people are pushing to go back to in-phase. And I think that's something that should be, maybe it sounds like backwards, but I think that to push maybe having more virtual events and more online learning spaces, I think it's important to maybe recognize and have a starting point saying it's not, we're not gonna have the same experience, or it's not gonna work the same as an in-phase event, because I think sometimes that can generate a lot of mistakes while creating an online event, like trying to deliver what would be delivered in an in-phase space, and then you can create disengagement with online events by trying to do that. So I think like a good starting point would be saying this is going to be different and we have to work different, and that participants will also get different experiences and will get different things from it than being in an in-phase space. So I think it's just it would be good acknowledging that there are things that online won't be able to do the same as in-phase. So and I think that's also an opportunity to bring the best of both options, just focusing on what's better from each and just starting from there.
It's a great point. I think in our report, we were talking about it as like different pathways of participation. I don't remember the exact language that we were using, but I think we called them kind of pathways of participation, which is some people want to be in the room making it happen. And some people just want to be a fly on the wall. and flying all the way halfway across the world to like sit in the back and kind of work on your emails and kind of listen and to like close your laptop from time to time to like tune into. That's for some people, that's the desired level of participation that they want to have. And actually virtual conferencing can attend to that, and asynchronous virtual participation can attend to that really kind of conveniently. But if we don't know what people are hoping to get out of their participation, we often use a one-size-fits-all kind of persona of what participation looks like. And then, as you rightly put, Valeria, is we often have like a second class experience of trying to mimic the in-person experience in a virtual environment. And then everybody walks away saying, I'm so done with virtual conferences. They're terrible. But it's the sort of the frame was totally like off. So I really value that. I don't know, Shauna, if you had other thoughts that were kind of part of that.
Yes, but I'll add a new one into the fray based on what you've just said, building on all of the conversation here, is that I think one of the challenges, so I can add this to the barrier Jamboard, is that the paradigm of planning these things is still stuck in a revenue model that advocates for in-person as the thing that we want people to strive to. And it's really hard to re-engineer those economic models. And I think that sometimes people just fall into this default of, therefore, to Valeria's point, they plan the virtual as a second class thing because they never had the budget to put into it from the first place. And therefore people come away feeling like they got less and never want to do it again.
Thanks for
the
that.
Creative revenue models and best practices would be a big win. Any recommendations? I'd love to hear those, because that I think is a really cornerstone issue we have to solve to be able to do what we're trying to do.
Fab.
And Nick share, I think it's Nick share a website with on Slack of all the vendors for supporting sustainability events. Maybe I can share that in the link later. There is a point in our breakout room, kind of broadening up the discussion beyond conferencing as well, which I found could be interesting. It's really thinking about, I think it's Valeria, you're talking about the kind of the capacity building aspect of it, but actually sometimes the learning outcome requires some hands-on, practical, face-to-face, like kind of that process, and kind of can you be completely replaced with in-person, can you completely be replaced with a virtual interaction? That's a big question mark that you're kind of raising in our breakout room as well. Do you want to speak a bit more about that?
Yeah, so yeah, building up on that, I was saying joining this session was great because just before joining, I had an interview with a person on a data collection process I'm doing to gather insights to enhance our training portfolio. And we talked a lot about this. And we didn't do it specifically for research or academic conferences, rather than on training. But yeah, we talked about how a lot of participants maybe wouldn't have the same confidence applying what they learned in a fully online space than maybe what they've learned if they had a hands-on practical experience too.
If I think this points to something that we've had a series of conversations on in terms of how, especially in hybrid moments, how we determine who joins in person and who joins virtually. And the default has unfortunately been the most important or the most privileged will attend in person, and the people with the lower status will attend virtually. And this happens global north, global south. This happens senior to early career. This happens to like well-resourced and kind of under-resourced participants. And to shift the decision calculus from whose presence would be most important and most beneficial to this event, and who stands to gain the most from being in the room, whilst at the same time saying like who stands to contribute the most by being in the room, which is often not the senior most people who fly in, give their 15-minute talk, and then like get back on their plane to go home, would potentially dramatically shift the makeup of those who are, and I think this is where that sort of sustainability and equity stand a chance to connect, is thinking through the decision of kind of how do we ask the question, do you really need to be there, or do we really need to have them there? That unfortunately to date has been not very well framed thus far. I don't want to be universal with saying that, but I think for the most part, got to have your keynote in the room. You got to have your kind of senior kind of funding partner in the room, and all their colleagues, with apologies to funding partners. But I think maybe some of that needs a rethink when we think about principles.
Yeah, and I was just thinking through what Shauna was saying about rethinking this this economic model, and what are the real value adds for online? You know, inclusion, convenience, time. You can just dip in and dip out. You can have your lunch at the same time. If it's so many more as well. So I don't know if we do a great job of singing those praises of the online, and I just wonder also, I mean, we have priced it differently. It's probably, I think, about a quarter of the price online versus in person. Obviously there's more cost to feed people, but how could we make the online experience to be seen as equally as valuable? Yeah, it's just a really interesting challenge. Yeah, thanks for that provocation.
Maybe one example I can share that from our case studies that we came out with, that we really kind of struck a chord, is the RISE Africa conference. So if you're looking for a model of a virtual conference that did a really kind of innovative and nice job, or other than having kind of interviewed them, I have no relationship with it, but they would have an online end of day debrief with a keynote who would join just the online community and talk through their impressions of the day, which then creates this sort of like, it's like the fireside chat that's only actually available to the people who are doing virtual participation, where you can interface in a way that they're not on a podium and far away. And it created that sense of getting the sort of the download on the day from somebody who's like a highly respected figure within your community. So these little touches that they did that I think created a sense of, wow, like the online community is doing something special, which is often like completely the opposite, which is like, we're just going to point a camera at the plenary room and you can kind of like watch and half hear the good times that everybody else is having, kind of trying to turn that on its head and think about that. Wonder if anyone who hasn't had a chance to sort of chip in wants to mention anything. Ariane, I know this is the focus of your PhD. I don't know if anything of this is kind of like resonating or perhaps in tension with the insights that you're starting to produce.
Yes, I have very similar results that I found, and also for me the big question is that this divide in the hybrid conferences between the virtual participants and the in-person participants. And I think what you said before, to provide this space for online only participants is important, but then still the question remains, if always the same people participate virtually, the less privileged they can only have the chance to network among each other. So the question is really, how can we make them, or maybe the other way around, how can we make the more privileged who join in person network with the ones online? How can we like persuade them or motivate them to actually maybe get on their laptop and talk to someone on the screen, like a virtual participant, instead of getting a coffee with someone who is there standing next to them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the sort of like coffee queue interactions with Professor so-and-so, who might actually be hiring a postdoc, but you would never even notice your email if it landed in their inbox, is this kind of, it's the kind of networking gold that people chase through these conferences. Bruce, you raise oh, sorry, Shauna.
Oh, I was just going to add, one of the thoughts that popped into my mind is that in focusing on conferences, I think one of the things that's interesting to maybe to do is what happens when we change the focus from being a conference to a community, so that we start to sort of transcend this short-term 3-5 day experience that happens intermittently throughout the year with this idea of who are these people? What are they looking for? How can we come forward together by managing a community through all of these diverse tools that we have? And then maybe it means that there's more regular virtual interaction. Maybe some of it's big, maybe some of it's one-on-one, and that's peppered with less frequent, high impact in-person activities. But I think that just changing the word sort of jostles us into thinking about what's the intention of what we're doing a little bit more, maybe holistically 365, 24/7.
As Nick, as the community managers of the Transformations Conference that has rebranded itself the Transformations Community, this has to land with you. Any like lessons learned about that moving from conference to community?
Yeah, great question. Lessons learned. Well, it's hard. It's not super straightforward. I mean, but just putting the intention out there is really key. So framing it, communicating it, this is the direction we want to go in. We're not there yet, by the way, but I've been involved in other communities where it is explicit. People feel part of a community. So what we're planning on doing is going to ask them, what do you need to feel part of a community? And then, so we want to crowdsource as much as possible, decentralize as much as possible. And then I think the first step is to kind of highlight some kind of shared identity. So that can be a shared history or a shared current purpose. What are we all doing together? And another item which I would love to do for our conference, if we have bandwidth, is mapping. So helping the system see itself. So then you can, and that can be a directory, it can be a nice, beautiful, moving image where you can put your picture in, or it's a community platform or something like that, but it can be a spreadsheet. But some way for people to see the system and see what the potential for interaction is. And one of the other things that is just coming up for me is the things that spark connections. What does spark connection? And every community is different. Are people comfortable asking? Whether it's asking to help on my research, or asking for help to get to the event, or asking for a bed, whatever the ask is. And this is very different culturally and personally. I've never been good at asking, but I really love this idea of curating a culture of asking, and really addressing why there's barriers to asking. Just some thoughts.
Amazing. Thanks, Nick. And I've posted the link to the community, which also has the link to the conference, which does allow virtual participation. And you'd be welcome to continue this dialogue, on a new Zoom page when we get there. I'm just got an eye on the time. We only have a few minutes left. And just, thank you all for some amazing contributions and inputs. It feels a little bit like there's not a kind of a clear sense of resolution to this, but I think that was kind of the aim, is that there's like a few harvests before we start trying to tie it together, and hopefully that idea is in itself something that turns out to be a little bit different and adds a little bit of value to these experiences. But we'll let you know in October 2023 whether it's worked out that way. Elaine, I don't know if you have any closing reflections before we sort of start to wrap up.
I wouldn't say closing, but kind of adding to the point of the community sense of community, which is very interesting because like from the survey results, I think it's a nature of the people who are in the field of sustainability that are from different disciplines and from different sectors. So actually existing membership doesn't actually decide whether or not people will go to a conference. And I think it speaks to a sort of need for a sense of community, that what it means to have a conference space, for what does it mean for a sustainability community to do that. And so that's kind of my reflection as a closing. Yeah.
Did anyone else want to chime in? I know, Bruce, you had raised a really valuable point of like questions of purpose. Why are we gathering in the first place, being kind of something overarching? Because it's been 2 years. It's on the calendar. Is there perhaps a better reason that we would want to gather? I don't know if you have reflections as somebody who sponsors gatherings and participates in many of them.
No, unfortunately, I'm just raising deeper questions than giving you answers. But it strikes me that occasionally we need to look beyond the simple questions, like we need to have a conference or a gathering. It's like, okay, why? What are we hoping to get out of that? And even with Adaptation Futures, as we've been thinking about those plenary spaces, why are they so valuable? Those moments of being able to provide a sense of community and a sense of time. Where have we come from? What are the key opportunities facing the adaptation research community now, post the 6th assessment report of IPCC, as we're about to be on the eve of the global stocktake under the Paris Agreement? This is a unique moment in time for a very interesting community that itself is evolving. So that sense of purpose, why are we gathering and what do we get out of that gathering? It's something I'm starting to realize is well articulated in the non-academic spaces. So you look at people that are maybe wedding planners or other type of business meetings, there are some fundamental planning questions that are beyond the logistics, as Shauna had cautioned us. Thank you.
Some great questions of purpose and intent that can kind of sit under all of these other kind of logistical and kind of technological and so on options, and great to keep in mind, Bruce. I think maybe with that, we could draw this session to a close. As I mentioned, we've now posted the links to the Transformations and the Adaptation Futures events, which are the sort of the next stops on this low carbon, what do we call them? Motorcade. And we really hope to be able to communicate back some of the insights. Thanks for everyone who shared their email. We'll make a note of that. And as we kind of pull this together, loop back to you, and hopefully even loop back to you in time to see if you have any final kind of inputs that you'd like to bring to what we're developing, so that your voices can be kind of represented in that conversation moving forward. Appreciate your willingness to take time out at all hours of the day, literally, and really kind of look forward to continuing this this conversation with you and with your peers who you may or may not know, but are kind of worrying about the same things in other corners of the world over the coming months. So thanks, everyone. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Yeah. Great to meet you.